So the next speaker is John Wilczynski. Definitely not the least, but he is the last. And so we thank you, John, for joining. Me and John have known each other for quite a while, and it's just great to collaborate with America Makes and NCDMM. So John is the executive director at America Makes in 2019. His prior role was a technology director responsible for facilitation of the National Additive Manufacturing 3D Printing Roadmap. So John's worked in a wide variety of manufacturing positions, varying levels of responsibility. So once again, John, thanks for coming today, telling people, I'm a full believer in America Makes, and I love, ITAMCO would have not have had the opportunities it has without America Makes. So I'm just a big advocate for it. And as a small manufacturer, so just definitely spreading the word about what America Makes can do. So we're excited that you can talk today. So I'll hand it over to you.
Thank you, sir. Mic check good?
Yeah, you're sounding great.
Awesome. All right. Well, yeah, thanks, Joel. I really appreciate you pulling this together. You can go right to the next slide. So I guess I get to make I would normally get to make the joke of I'm the only one keeping you between, this and the rehearsal or the dinner afterwards. But in this case, in COVID times, it's more like I'm probably keeping you from cutting your grass or, doing something fun like that. So I'll kind of talk through a little bit of who we are. It's a bit different than what some of the other presentations are about, although most of the folks that have talked to date are engaged with us in a variety of different levels. So we certainly know all the different players that we've talked through or that have talked so far today. So I'll give you a quick overview of who we are. America Makes as an institute. We're focused on three kind of major focus areas, and that is convening, coordinating, and catalyzing the additive manufacturing industry. And I'll talk through a variety of different ways that we're doing that. The intention here is to give you a little bit of a sample. I know there's a pretty diverse group of folks on the phone, just to make sure you know some of the different offerings that are out there and ways that we're trying to help move this industry forward as a whole. So we really, focus our efforts on coordinating around technology development, then transitioning that technology, and then making sure we have the workforce properly educated in order to take advantage of all this great technology that the speakers so far today have really walked through. Next slide. We'll continue a bit of the overview. We are what we consider a public-private partnership. So we've been working at this for just under 8 years. We actually have our birthday, or I guess 8th anniversary coming up in a couple of weeks here in August. We went out and put together a proposal for the very first Manufacturing USA Institute. So we're part of that structure of institutes. There are, if you're not familiar with that, currently 15 manufacturing innovation institutes in the United States across 15 different technologies. We're the first institute that was formed under that umbrella, and we are operated under the Department of Defense. So the majority of the work that we do is directly with the Department of Defense, although we work very closely with a number of other agencies, and we'll talk to a little bit of that as we go through this. We do have, we're a consortium, if you will, in that we have members that really drive the institute forward in those various areas of technology development and transition and really in education, making sure that we're educating folks for the right things and on the right technologies. So we have well over 200 members right now that make up the institute. Next slide gives you a little bit of a flavor of what that makeup looks like. It's pretty diverse. Obviously you can't read any of that, but there are lots of household names and then many names that you might not know because they're really small organizations. So we have a pretty good representation from small and medium-sized organizations like ITAMCO. And we also have many of the major players from large industry, and that's both large industry, from your conventional GMs, GEs, Lockheeds of the world, to the largest players in the additive manufacturing space, like the Siemens and Autodesks, et cetera. And then we have nonprofits, many academic institutions. As those of you who are familiar, there's quite a bit of work going on in academia. We really focus on trying to bridge the basic research community to industry, and everything that we do is focused on applied research. So I'm not sure if you're familiar with the terms manufacturing readiness level or technology readiness level, but we really play in the kind of interim space between basic research and between commercialization. So we're that bridge trying to bring those two communities together. Next slide. This slide it's interesting in that it's something that we created years ago and continues to hold true today. There are tremendous advantages to additive manufacturing, and with that, there are a number of very specific challenges that come up. So on one hand, we know that we can introduce complexity, geometries, lightweighting, really consolidation in a manner that we're not capable of doing with other technologies, and up to and including functionally graded materials and everything in that space. But there's realities that come along with that although that may be theoretically possible, there's challenges around getting those types of products introduced and the process qualified and the part certified such that we're able to actually utilize those on whether it's aircraft or a vehicle or in a oil and gas situation, whatever it might be, or implant within the body. So a number of the speakers so far have talked about more specific use cases. The reality is we're working together with the community to try to organize both the advantages, but primarily focusing on those challenges. So I won't spend too much time in here talking about those. Just please understand, especially if you're just getting into this, additive is certainly not the panacea that's going to solve all of your problems, although there's tremendous opportunities that come along with it. So next slide. The key is really trying to figure out how do you take advantage of the advantages that come along with additive, whether it's complexity exploration or multi-material or consolidation of components, internal cooling, wild geometry that you otherwise couldn't produce. So one of the ways that we really focus quite a bit on bringing the community together. So think back to that convene, coordinate, catalyze. The convene component of what we do, although this is increasingly difficult as we can't come together physically, we're doing a lot of things just like this to try to make sure we're coming together around the technology. We regularly pulse our community. We like to use the term member driven, in that we do not sit back and try to dream up where the technology needs to go, but instead work with our community members and consortium members through various working groups and advisory groups, stakeholder councils, et cetera, to work on identification of R&D project areas that are of most need at a particular point in time. And I'll talk a little bit about where we're at with that, but there are a series of different technical working groups that focus very specifically on materials challenges. Where are we at today? How are we making progress? What are the gaps? And then so on for if we think of the design space, where are we at? What are our gaps? How do we address these? And then we really focus on coordinating that response. Then we've got tremendous focus on community and networking, bringing people together. Joel alluded to it a little bit during the introduction. A big part of what we do is trying to connect that community together. We're ultimately in it for trying to get the technology to the point that it is more broadly accepted and better utilized. And then through that, we create a number of different ways that we believe members are getting value out of that, whether it's understanding where we're at in the additive industry today, getting access to data and knowledge, and and we funded a tremendous amount of research over the years. All of that is available as member resources, and then there's certainly opportunities to come together around particular challenges and really focus on the third C, which is catalyzing and taking a next step to take some action. So next slide, please. Our portfolio as a whole, really focuses on that logic that the needs are driven by the membership. So we're identifying these challenges, and then we're making strategic investments. And early on, there was a bit of resources, or the resources that started the Institute, which drove our initial investment. From that point forward, we're really looking on very specific challenges that get identified, and how do we take that next step to take action. We've funded well over 100 different projects. These numbers are actually a little bit low. We need to get this updated based on our most recent calls. Approaching $200 million of research that's been funded through the Institute, both through funding going out the door and through cost match. So that's a combined number. There is a element of cost share or in-kind contribution that is really core to what we're doing at the Institute. So it's a model where, if in many cases, or I'll say in many cases, where if funding is provided to move the technology forward, many folks from industry and academia are matching those dollars with their own dollars, because it's some very specific effort that they're also interested in, which obviously leverages the government dollar, but also leverages the company's or an organization's dollars, or their IRAD budget or something like that. So all of that ultimately driving to solutions that are then made available. And I won't get into that much, but of this portfolio, members have access to the various different tangible artifacts and specific deliverables, whether that's a matrix on how to build an experiment, or it's the very specific fatigue data out of a particular material type for a particular process that can be then used and built into a specification. So there's quite a continuum of different work that's been done at the Institute over the years, and that just continues. We're going to be announcing here in the next couple of weeks the next ways to get engaged through an open project call. So that'll be coming out here relatively soon. Next slide. So the next few, I'm going to just briefly talk about some of the different core activities that we're doing. And I have them listed here as value propositions to a variety of different communities. So we work with a very diverse set of stakeholders. A government, so if you think of it as a public-private partnership, government is a key partner at the table in these discussions. So we've built a relationship where there are government organizations and working groups and stakeholder councils that map directly to kind of the industry, academic, nonprofit stakeholder councils, and we're the bridge that helps bring those two together. So whether it's a need being identified by industry around a particular material development need, or the government bringing forward a gap that they've identified and are interested in learning from industry, where their interests lie, we do a lot of bringing those different communities together. Again, it's really through these advisory groups and working groups that I mentioned earlier, and we have a wide variety of them. So we have a diverse set of interests. It's not just about technical, although obviously there's a pretty significant element of technical work that goes on. We work on policy and really looking to drive the national narrative for investment in additive manufacturing. That's been very prominent in our last couple of months of work, especially as additive has made a significant amount of headway, and it's much better understood where additive may fit into the future of manufacturing, especially as we think to distributed manufacturing, as it relates to COVID, et cetera. That value proposition obviously is something that can be scaled dramatically to serve many, many other industries. Next slide talks to some of the different ways that we help people engage. So much like this forum that Joel and team put together here, you know, we're very interested in bringing the community together around very specific topics, whether technical or, you know, we have an event coming up here in a couple weeks, or next week, I guess it is, focused on economics, opportunities, and challenges of designing for additive manufacturing. So that's a forum where we'll very similarly bringing together experts, talking, giving the opportunity to interact and ask questions. A couple weeks later, we then have our technical review and exchange, which is normally a fantastic face-to-face event that we've transitioned all activity to virtual for the rest of the year. So we're working through that. I don't know if Janet is still on or not, but big thanks to Link 3D. They have been very helpful in working with us to create a platform and mechanism for us to stay engaged with the community, and it's been very successful. And we've actually seen numbers start to, or not start, but increase over what our face-to-face are. So it's been great, although different. It's been very valuable. The second way, you know, I mentioned these different working groups. There's a lot of work that goes on, you know, behind the scenes within the individual working groups, where they're looking at, you know, identification of where we're at today, where do we need to go. They're diverse or cross sections across many industries, many academic organizations, nonprofits, et cetera, to identify what those different gaps are, and then how do we put those together in a package so we can go take some next step. Those ultimately come out in recommendations, and those are seen through a variety of different means. Ultimately, you know, best case scenario is they find someone who is willing to sponsor them, and ultimately they become funded activities. So the couple that are referenced here are examples of technical gaps, or, you know, kind of requirement gaps that have been identified through our road mapping process. Identification of needs. One was around, well, this is around a AM data moonshot. There's going to be some activity around that very soon. And then the scale up, scale out, you know, that program has received funding. It's really about how do we build things, you know, much faster, much larger build volumes, much lower costs. So think back to one of the earliest presentations, you know, it really in the space that they're living, how do we get to that point? If we're gonna start to fly to very quickly or very far away, we need to be able to do it much more rapidly than we're able to today. So it's really the way those working groups get realized into programs that ultimately get funding. Next slide. Last two ways that, you know, I just want to talk about some of the things that we're doing, and these are kind of programmatic core activities within the Institute. One is in standards. A few years ago, we sat down with a large number of the different standards bodies, and everyone understood that the position we were in was not acceptable, and we needed to move quickly. And that ultimately led to us, again, being the convener and coordinator, where we brought the community together. I think our very first workshop, we had 500 people at or something like that, and started work on developing a standards roadmap that's led to multiple versions of that. It's actually a dynamic roadmap that you can go online and view right now. If you go to ANSI /AMSC, so you can find where we're at, and we have the standards bodies, the ASTMs and SAEs, et cetera, ASMEs of the world, updating it actually when they're making progress against an individual standard that was identified as a gap in the standards roadmap. So this is something where we're helping bring everyone together, but really beyond, you know, the next step after we get them together is taking action, and that's really where the coordination comes in. Which leads me to the last topic here on the slide, which is road mapping. We've been road mapping really since the day we started. Our very first project call was based on roadmap topics. We've done it a variety of different ways, but it ultimately is built on itself year in and year out. We utilize a requirements-based approach, much like a systems engineered approach to building a system. we're doing that for the technology. So there's quite a bit of detail behind the scenes that's built out within what we call our digital storefront, which is a Siemens PLM system. And that's where all the data and the meat actually live. So as members, you get to dig into that and have access to all of that content. Next slide. So the last area that we're, as a institute, one of our 3 core functions is developing the workforce. And that workforce is broad in spectrum for us, really from K through gray. So early elementary up to and including continuing education, and really everywhere in between. If you go to the next slide, it talks to some of the different activities. This could be a topic on its own. There's so much activity going on within this space. We've built out bodies of, an additive manufacturing body of knowledge, along with SME Tooling U. You can go view that. There's competency models associated with it, different assessments for, we're executing a project right now with ONR, the Office of Naval Research, which is developing a series of different training programs and certification programs with Tooling U SME. We've developed a course on design, a more advanced course on design for additive manufacturing. We've been part of apprenticeship programs with Department of Labor and training people in additive manufacturing apprentices that have been approved. There's a number of different pathways, career pathways, where if you only need a very specific course, you can go in and get a digital badge within that course, or a micro credential. If you build a certain organization of those together, that might lead to a certification. So we're working on a number of different things like that. Again, this is not necessarily for us delivering the content, but it is us bringing the community together through stakeholder advisory groups to understand what do they need, what is industry actually expecting their employees are capable of, and then how do we make sure educators understand that so they're building programs. So again, there's tremendous resources available here through work that's been done and is readily available to the community. Next slide. I think this one is one that is not going to get any real attention here just because of time. A number of these items have been covered. We're touching many different considerations across the production and acquisition of additive manufactured parts. So a lot more goes into it. So for those of you who are, relatively new to this space, it's not just about going and I think many of the speakers have alluded to this. This is not about just hitting the button and you get a part on the end that you can put on your vehicle. There's a number of different, just like any other manufacturing process, processes required in order to get to a final part. So there's certainly supply chain considerations and sourcing, which we heard some great talks about, some different softwares and ways to track that. Absolutely design considerations, performance and durability. There's tremendous amount of work going on. If we were to dig into our portfolio, this is probably where the most activity is taking place today. So understanding of what the process is ultimately yielding, and is that acceptable? So there's a lot that goes into that, and that's a very broad spectrum, from effects of defects to corrosion. There's many different considerations that you need to think about when you're thinking about the performance and durability of an additively manufactured part. There's post-processing, just like many different manufacturing operations. Inspection is critical, and in many cases there's quite a bit of work going on in this space. And then cost and rate ultimately becomes a major driver associated with the technology. So this might be one where if you are new at this, these are just certainly some things to consider. There's ourselves are interested in talking to you, and I'm sure many of the others on the phone have quite a bit of interest in this space as well. Next slide talks to kind of the supply chain element, and I won't go too far here other than to say, this is absolutely a very visible issue right now as we think of COVID. It is certainly a major issue in the sustainment of vehicles, whether land vehicles or air vehicles, for the Department of Defense. And we're leading a program that's focused on how do we better understand what the manufacturing community's capability is as it relates to additive. What is it that the Army actually is looking for and needs, and how do we bring those two together? And there's a tremendous amount of activity that goes in here as well, from supply chain assessments to understanding risk associated with that, identification of where our problem areas are, and ultimately we're trying to close those gaps, to work with manufacturers so they understand. We're going through a couple of exercises right now, and some of the very initial feedback is the people that we're asking to manufacture parts for us aren't used to manufacturing components for the DoD. So there's tremendous amount of education that needs to be done there, let alone the actual ability to reproduce a part across the country in a distributed manner. So very significant supply chain activities, and I think you've seen that thread both today as well as in the news here lately. It's critical, whether it's for hand sanitizer or it's a component that goes on an F-15. So supply chain is going to be a key driver in the next handful of years. The next few slides talk to you can go to the next slide. Very specific examples. I will just hit them so you understand what they are, and then kind of close out for the day. I had mentioned standards and the value associated with them. This program here was specifically focused on developing an Ultim 9085 property database. So think design allowables. In order for you to actually manufacture a component, you need to understand, what the material specifications associated with it are, such that you can design a component that meets your performance requirements. So Ultim 95 is through this program that we executed along with the FAA and the Department of Defense. We've created a database that is available for the material that you can get access to. There's a very specific path that you have to go down, but it is at least a known path to go down. So this was a big move forward in the ability for manufacturers to produce components additively that could ultimately find their way onto aircraft. And we're starting to see progress being made here, and people going through the steps of upgrading their equipment, nozzles, buying the right material, following the process, and ultimately getting approved to manufacture following these steps. That's obviously not the end game we want, that we have to go through all of those steps for every material, but it's an important step forward. We really see materials as a major driver over the next couple of years, as in my opinion, if we don't make progress, we're going to wildly underutilize the technology, but there's very specific steps we have to go through in order to get to that point. Next slide is simply an example of a course that was put together. So in this case, it was something we did with the Air Force, a very specific topic of training personnel. So in this case, this is a well-known technology, a much faster path to approval, because ultimately you're manufacturing the tooling versus the actual component. So this was a course that was put together, packaged, delivered, just one of the many examples of different courses that are available to folks through the work that's been done at the Institute. And the last example is just a example, you can go to the next slide, example of how we've been building from one program to the next. This effort really is a collection of 4 different funded efforts over the past 5 years, focusing on really scale and rate. And our understanding of what's going on within a system, how multiple lasers interact, how do we get to the point of having a larger build volume, how do we have open protocols, et cetera, et cetera. So there's been funding and a number of different performers that have ultimately now come together into development of this system. It's going to be handed over as a research tool then that others can utilize and take advantage of this as an open platform. So there'll be some more coming out about where we're actually at with this here in the next couple of months. But it's an example of how we're building to the point of having a capability delivered that industry can take advantage of. That's what we're ultimately trying to get to here, is commercialized technology that move us forward as an industry. So next slide is my last one. And it's just simply a quick reminder of a couple of events that we have coming up. I mentioned the July 23rd event is really focused on the economics of design for additive. We have a series of experts that are going to be briefing out there. And then we have a really interesting interactive kind of panel session and virtual meeting following. And then a couple weeks later, we have our kind of late summer technical review and exchange. We're going to be making some pretty interesting announcements those 2 days around project call opportunities, opportunities for funding, et cetera. So if you're interested, they're both open. Both those links can get you to the point where you can register for them for free. So that's all I had. Certainly thank you, Joel, for pulling us in and letting us close this out for today.
Yeah, thanks, John. Appreciate it. And yeah, so as you mentioned, so yeah, it sounds like you're like, even with, I always enjoyed the MMX, the member meetings, and then also the TRX too for the technical side. So you're able to take those virtual now and try to still have that kind of collaboration.
Yeah, and it's been it's hard because there's this balance of, there's a lot of people doing that. You're trying to find, things that are different, talk to the right audience. But we've had, good success. I think we've been trying to vary our topics. We're getting some audience members that are unconventional for us. So there's a unique blend of folks who maybe we've never been able to reach before. So that's really interesting. And then, we have pulsed our members recently too to make sure we're delivering the content they care about.
Sure, yeah. Can you talk a little bit, one thing I thought was like, for people that are new to additive manufacturing, I thought the coolest thing was about the NFL helmet challenge. Can you just speak like briefly about that and like what that was about? It was like pretty cool. I saw some of the inserts. Yeah.
For sure. So we'd been working with the NFL safety, I can't remember their official title, but the folks who are looking at player safety, and they'd reached out to us about potentially supporting an event. Ultimately, that came together last fall, where they had the NFL helmet challenge, and we hosted it in Youngstown. We had about 350 people come together, and the whole program was really about trying to bring together experts and put them in a room and figure out how we solve this problem. And what ultimately came out after a couple of days of different networking events and opportunities to present your capabilities to the rest of the community, a bunch of teams formed, and then they put in their submissions. They just announced last week, maybe the week before, a series of different teams that have won kind of next phase of award. Mm-hmm. And a number of them happen to be America Makes members, so that was fantastic. There's some really interesting press out there, novel designs. I mean, there's very different approaches being taken to how they're going to address what is, obviously their number one priority in the NFL. So, in one hand, it was much like COVID, and obviously they're very different things. Mm-hmm. But for us as an organization who's trying to move additive forward, they're things that help the public understand where a technology fits in.
Right.
When I talk about a blisk for an aircraft engine, not too many people understand what that is, let alone when we start talking about crazy high temperature, materials or multi-material and exotic designs. That doesn't mean anything to my brothers who, in some cases are engineers themselves. They just don't get involved in that kind of work. When you mention you're putting a unique geometry in a helmet that will help save, potentially prevent a concussion, or I created a face shield and I was able to take them to a hospital nearby.
Right.
People move beyond, oh yeah, I saw one of those at Toys R Us and, thought it was cool. So that's a big deal for us. I mean, it's as much as I think we didn't pay attention to that early on. We had a meeting a few months ago we have a government relations advisory group, and many of the biggest printing companies are part of that, because we talk a lot about policy and where are we at and what do we need to be thinking about as a country, and where does additive fit in, et cetera. And walking out of that, it was kind of this realization that we're having our moment, maybe more so than any other time before, just because people get it. You couldn't turn on the news without seeing that we were making a difference. So now you have to figure out, what was it that we did collectively, not us, but collectively as a technology, and all of the other supporting advanced manufacturing technologies that made a difference. So there's an event coming up, if you hadn't seen it. The Air Force is having something called the Advanced Manufacturing Olympics. Within that, there's 5 different challenges, I think, right now. One's a supply chain challenge, one's a tech data challenge, one is a materials challenge. So there's all these different challenges that exist. And they're asking us the question of, we were able to make an impact with additive on COVID. What does that mean for sustaining an aircraft? So we're working to try to piece that story together. There's a number of different organizations who, we're not the only ones who've, seen this. There's a lot of opportunity, but I think for us as an industry, this is extremely powerful opportunity and something we've never had before.
Sure. Yeah, no, it's just cool like that, what America Makes is doing, and, being the first manufacturing USA institute, and because I remember going to, I think it was Canton, Ohio, where like the NFL Hall of Fame's at. And I remember like going there as a kid, and then now it's like, America Makes is in Ohio, and they're, the teams from America Makes are building this, helmet technology, and they're 3D printing it. I mean, it's just cool to see like how technology is.
We got to thank you. I got an email thank you from Roger Goodell about a week ago.
Oh wow, that's pretty cool. Yeah,
his awesome email address, from him, sent from iPhone. I mean, I'm like, that's pretty cool.
Yeah, that's pretty cool. That's awesome. Yeah. So pretty cool. Well, anyway, John, always a pleasure like talking to you, and like I'm so glad you were able to come on our panel. Obviously, hopefully next year, we can come on site and we can have the the conference again all together. But once again, thanks for taking the time to be on today. So everybody give John a round of applause.
Thanks.
Thanks.